The first sound was not a sound at all. It was a ripple, a whisper across the void. The machines called it a distress call. The aliens named it a warning. But the humans heard something else. A question. Would they answer? The fleets of the galaxy had already fallen silent. Whole empires had heard the signal and recoiled, afraid of what might be waiting on the other end. It was too far, too dangerous, too costly. Entire civilizations debated in councils of marble and glass, weighing risks, calculating probabilities. Most decided the same. Not worth it. But humanity had never been good at walking away. The old admirals remembered the last time a call like this had been heard. A century ago, a mining colony far beyond the spiral arm, besieged by a predator race older than stars. Everyone said the world was lost. Everyone but the humans. They sent their fleets anyway. Half never came back. But the colony still stood. The aliens called them for a reason. Born on a planet that punished weakness, they carried that stubborn defiance into the stars. And so, when this new signal stretched across alien borders, cold, faint, desperate, it was not silence that answered. It was motion. Engines warmed. Old warships, half retired, rose again from orbiting graveyards. Crews volunteered faster than lists could be drawn. Some were too young to remember the last war. Others were too old to be stepping onto a deck again. But they came anyway, whispering the same words. If they're calling, we go. Even the youngest alien allies did not understand. Why, they asked. The signal is not human, it is not yours. A captain once decorated, now forgotten, only smiled at the question. Doesn't matter who's calling, he said. What matters is someone needs us. And that was the thing, that alien thing. Because to every other species, sacrifice was weighed like currency, worth measured against survival. To humans, it was never so simple. There was a madness in them, a madness that laughed at odds, that burned fuel it did not have, that stared down the impossible and whispered, "We'll try anyway." That madness built their fleet. They gathered in silence at first, along the edge of the Orion Gap. Hundreds of vessels, some patched with scrap, some gleaming with new alloy, all flying the same battered banners. The admirals studied the signal, triangulated its source. It lay across 3 hostile borders, past the ruins of 2 failed colonies, beyond even the mapped lanes of trade. It was suicide. Every chart, every calculation screamed it. So why, then, did the fleet grow larger with each passing day? Because word had spread. Word that humans were answering the call again. That someone, anyone, would not let the darkness swallow another voice. And one by one, even alien ships began to drift toward them. Small ones, scouts, mercenaries, even smugglers who had once cursed humanity's stubborn pride. They came, unsure of why they felt compelled but unable to stay away. It was not humanity's weapons that drew them. It was not their engines or their strategy. It was the fire. That reckless, unexplainable fire that made even the hopeless feel they could fight. Yet beneath the steel and banners, doubts still lingered. Some whispered of defeat, of throwing lives away for strangers they would never meet. Some feared that the fleet was chasing a ghost, that the signal was nothing but a trap. Even the admirals wondered. In the long silence of their quarters, they stared at the star maps and asked the same question. What if we are wrong? But humanity had always lived with that question, and answered it the same way. We'll find out. So the fleet burned its engines brighter. The signal pulsed again, faint, dying. And across alien borders, hope answered back, carried not in words, but in the rising thunder of ships moving once more into the unknown. The first border was always the hardest. It wasn't just the patrols. It wasn't the minefields or the silent defense satellites lying in wait. It was the weight of a decision made real. Crossing a line meant no turning back, and every officer, every crewman felt it in their bones when the order came down. All ships, engaged drives, crossed the line. The human fleet surged forward. Alien eyes watched from a distance. Some laughed at the madness. Others whispered uneasily, wondering if they were witnessing history's repeat or its undoing. Because this was not a war, not yet. No treaties had been signed, no declarations read. The humans were answering a call that was not theirs for a people they had never met. And still they went. Why? The alien empires could not understand. They remembered their own wars, fought only when survival was forced upon them, calculated to the last resource. To them, this was lunacy, throwing ships and lives into a void for no return. But humanity had always seen war differently, not as a balance sheet, but as a story they refused to let end in silence. The crews felt it too. On the mess decks, laughter echoed even as ration packs grew thinner. Someone strummed a guitar salvaged from Earth. Old songs bled into new voices. 1,000 light years from home, in the shadow of hostile stars, the sound was raw, defiant. And it carried. On alien vessels that had joined them, hesitant, confused, the songs were heard over open comms. At first, they mocked it. Then slowly they listened. And for reasons they could not explain, their claws tapped, their tendrils swayed, their voices hummed along. It was madness, and yet it was contagious. The signal pulsed again. Weaker this time. A ghostly heartbeat across the dark. The admirals gathered in the war room. Holographic stars burned above the table, roots flashing in red. Each path cut through hostile territory. Each path screamed risk. "We won't make it in time," one captain muttered. "We'll make it," said another. "How can you know?" The old admiral leaned forward, gaze sharp. "Because if we don't, then no one will, and I refuse to believe this galaxy will end on silence." It wasn't strategy, it wasn't logic, but the words settled into the room like iron. Orders followed. The fleet split into wings, weaving through debris fields and pirate-ridden lanes. Every border crossed drew fire. Every battle left scars. And still they moved. What the galaxy did not understand was that humans did not fight because they were sure of victory. They fought because someone needed them, and that was enough. On one vessel, a young ensign stared at the comms readout. The signal trembled faintly, repeating the same fragmented pattern. Her hands shook as she traced the waveform, trying to decipher meaning. Her commander noticed. "Scared?" "Yes, sir." "So am I." The ensign blinked. She had expected denial, strength, not this quiet admission. "But," the commander said, voice steady now, "fear doesn't mean we stop. It means we keep going, because if we're afraid, imagine how afraid they must be, whoever's sending that call. They need us to be braver than we feel." The words stayed with her long after he walked away. Humans wore their fear openly. They did not hide it behind masks of pride like so many alien captains, and somehow that made their courage heavier, not lighter, because they chose it in spite of the shaking hands. The signal pulsed again. But something was different. Hidden within the static was a voice, broken, faint, alien. Not words anyone could recognize, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading, desperate. The fleet's comm officers worked tirelessly, patching fragments together. The message was incomplete, the language unknown. But one phrase began to emerge, translated across syntax and sound. "Please, not again." The room went silent when it was heard, "Not again." What did that mean? What horror had they faced before? And what was coming for them now? Questions burned, but answers remained out of reach. The admirals pressed the fleet harder, supplies dwindled, engines strained. And yet every time morale wavered, the message repeated, "Please, not again." It became a vow whispered among the crews. A vow that no matter what awaited them at the source, humanity would not let history repeat. But the enemy was not blind. The hostile empires along the border began to notice. Human warships were crossing in force, disrupting lanes, igniting battles. To them, this was not a rescue. This was invasion. And so, fleets stirred. Ancient war machines awoke. Alliances formed not to answer the signal, but to crush the ones who dared to move toward it. The humans knew it was coming, knew the trap was closing. But when had that ever stopped them? The admirals sent one last message across the fleet. The way ahead will break us. Some of you will not return, but the call was made and we are the ones who answered. Let the galaxy judge us for it, but let it never say humanity stayed silent. And so the fleet drove deeper, across alien borders, into hostile fire, following a voice they did not understand, but believed in anyway. Because that was the thing. The galaxy weighed cost against survival. But humanity weighed survival against meaning. And if the signal meant someone still lived, still fought, still hoped, then humanity would answer no matter the price. The stars trembled with their passage, and in the distance the signal pulsed once more. The first battle was not glorious. It was chaos. Enemy ships fell on the humans like wolves, fast and sharp, striking from hidden positions. Missiles tore through escorts. Hulls split, spilling fire into the void. The black between stars lit with burning metal and silent screams. And yet not a single vessel turned back. "Hold the line," the admiral ordered. "Keep the signal in sight." The crews obeyed. They fought not like strategists but like survivors. Shields overloaded, but human gunners fired until their barrels glowed. Engines bled fuel, but captains rammed broken ships into enemy cruisers, dragging both into oblivion. The aliens watching could not comprehend it. To fight while retreat was possible, to choose destruction when surrender might mean survival. Madness. But to the humans it was simple. If the signal's voice was still calling, then they could not fall silent before reaching it. The battle left scars. A dozen ships gone, hundreds of names recorded. And still the fleet pressed onward. On one carrier the med bays overflowed. A young medic moved from cot to cot, hands shaking as he worked. Alien patients lay among the human wounded mercenaries who had joined the fleet, confused by the very war they now bled in. One of them, scales torn and blood dark against metal, whispered weakly, Why fight so hard? Why not yield?" The medic looked at him, exhausted eyes burning with something more than duty. "Because someone has to stand," he said simply, "and if it isn't us, then who?" The alien closed his eyes, baffled, but deep inside a seed was planted. The signal pulsed again, stronger now as if their approach breathed life into its dying voice. The comms officers scrambled to refine the translation. The phrase repeated, clearer each time. "Please, not again. Not again." The words gnawed at the admirals. What had these unknown people endured? What could have them so deeply that their first message to the stars was a plea not to repeat it? And darker still, what force powerful enough to break entire civilizations could now be rising once more? The human fleet did not know, but they would not let fear answer for them. The enemy knew humanity would not stop. And so they tightened their grip. At the second border, a wall of ships waited. Not raiders, not pirates, an armada. Whole empires had joined to bar the path. Their leaders did not care about the signal's source. They cared about what it meant. If humanity succeeded, if they crossed every line, it would shatter the fragile balance of power. So they gathered everything to stop them. And yet the fleet advanced. One alien commander, watching from the safety of her station, muttered in disbelief, "They cannot win. Why do they try?" Her aide, younger and less certain, whispered, "Because trying is what makes them human." The clash was brutal. Enemy fire rained like storms. Human ships staggered but never stopped. Fighters screamed through flak, weaving impossible maneuvers. Captains laughed in the face of doom, their voices carrying across open channels, mocking the inevitability of defeat. "Too many," one alien cried. "Never enough," a human answered, teeth bared in a grin. Losses piled higher, but for every vessel destroyed, another surged forward. For every human life extinguished, others shouted their names and pressed on. This was the trait the galaxy could never understand. Humanity's loyalty to the fallen. They did not leave their dead behind. They carried them in memory, in rage, in fire. And when the enemy expected despair, they found only fury. The battle did not end in victory. It ended in survival. The human fleet, tattered and smoking, forced a gap through the armada, not because they could overwhelm it, but because they refused to yield. Behind them lay wreckage, ahead only uncertainty. But the signal still pulsed, and in its trembling voice, another fragment emerged. "They are coming." 3 words, enough to chill even the boldest heart. Who was coming? What force had made entire civilizations beg not to endure them again? And what chance did even humanity have against such a shadow? The admirals gathered once more, faces weary, voices grim. "We don't know what we're walking into," one admitted. Another answered, "We never did." The old admiral looked around the room, eyes sharp despite the weight of command. "Then we do what humans have always done. We walk forward anyway." Silence followed, heavy, certain. And so, battered and bloodied, the fleet turned their eyes to the final border. They knew more enemies would rise. They knew more lives would be lost. But the voice in the signal was waiting. And humanity could not leave it unanswered. Because the galaxy believed survival was the highest goal. But for humans, it was never enough to merely survive. They had to matter. They had to stand, even against the impossible. And so the fleet pressed on, toward a darkness no one else dared face, carrying not certainty, not victory, but the unshakable fire of a people who refused to let another voice be silenced. The stars ahead were quiet, too quiet, as if the galaxy itself held its breath, waiting for the madness of humanity to either shatter or ignite into legend. And the signal pulsed once more. A heartbeat against the void. Please, not again. The third border was different. The others had been walls of fire, patrols, minefields, ambushes. Brutal, yes, but predictable. This one was empty. No fleets waiting, no cannons bristling, just silence. And that silence unnerved even the bravest. Humans distrusted quiet skies. On their calm seas hid storms, still forests hid predators. They knew too well that danger never announced itself. It lurked. It waited. The admirals studied their maps. Every scan confirmed it. No hostiles, no patrols. Nothing. So why did the crews feel the weight of 1,000 eyes watching them from the dark? The signal pulsed again, stronger, clearer now. The broken words stitched themselves together with aching effort. "They are coming, please, not again." Whispers ran through the decks. What were they? What had they done before? And what horror could terrify an entire civilization into sending a message that carried not a plea for help, but for mercy? A young lieutenant voiced the question aloud, her voice cracking. "What if we can't stop them? What if we're too late?" The admiral looked at her, old eyes tired but steady. "Then we fight anyway, because if we can't stop them, who else will?" It was not reassurance, it was truth, and somehow that truth steadied the hearts of those who heard it. Because humans had always lived beneath threats they could not conquer. Hurricanes, plagues, quakes that shattered cities, predators that hunted their ancestors in the night. They had learned not victory but defiance. Not control but survival. And they carried that defiance now across the stars. The fleet moved deeper, the silence grew heavier. On one ship, a poet scribbled lines onto scrap metal, words that spread through the commnet like wildfire. "We walk into the dark not because we are unafraid, but because someone must carry the light." Alien crews who had joined them repeated the words, not fully understanding why they burned so deeply. But they burned all the same. Then the quiet broke. At first it was static, a ripple across sensors. Then shapes, vast, twisted shapes sliding from the black, darker than shadow. Not ships, not in the way fleets understood them. Living metal, hulls fused with bone, weapons that pulsed like beating hearts. The enemy. They had arrived. The galaxy had forgotten their name, or perhaps erased it out of fear. but those who had glimpsed their wars before whispered one word across trembling lips. Harvesters, a species older than empires, moving from system to system like a plague. Not conquerors, not builders, stripping worlds bare, leaving only silence. The signal had not been a call for help. It was a warning. A voice crying across the void, "They are coming back." The human fleet reeled at the sight. Even the most seasoned captains felt the old instinct to flee, claw at their hearts. Against such things, what could flesh and steel do? But then another sound came. Not from the enemy. From the signal. Clearer now than ever before, the voice trembled through every comm system. Alien, fragile, but unmistakably alive. "Please, we cannot endure again. Please, anyone." And that was enough. Humans did not need certainty. They did not need odds. They needed only a reason. And the voice was reason enough. "All ships," the Admiral ordered, his voice carrying across the fleet. "Form the line, we hold them here." Alien allies stared in disbelief. "Here, you cannot mean to fight here. You cannot win against that." But the humans were already moving. Weapons charged, engines flared, crews shouted war cries into the dark. And laughter crackled across open comms, wild and fearless. One human captain grinned into the void and spat his words like fire. "Win? No, we're not here to win. We're here to make damn sure someone else gets the chance." It was madness. It was impossible. And it was human. The harvesters advanced, vast shadows blotting out the stars. The fleet met them head-on. And the galaxy, watching from far-off borders, realized with a shiver that humanity had chosen once again to fight the impossible. Not because it was rational, not because it was winnable, but because it was right. The first exchange lit the sky like a second sun. Human ships cracked, burning, but fired even as they broke. Alien allies, swept up in the storm, fought alongside them, their disbelief slowly hardening into something else, something frighteningly close to faith. Because against all reason, the humans did not break. They bled, they burned, but they stood. And in that defiance, a spark caught. A spark that whispered to every watcher, every ally, every enemy alike. If humanity will not yield to this, then perhaps nothing truly can. The battle raged. And far away, the signal pulsed again. Not weaker, not fading. Stronger, as if hope itself was answering back. The first clash had been brutal. The second was worse. The harvesters did not fight like fleets. They did not flank or retreat. They consumed. Their ships, if they could be called ships, latched onto human vessels like predators, tearing hulls apart with living weapons that shrieked as they struck. Whole cruisers vanished in silence, swallowed by the abyss. And yet the humans kept firing. Main batteries full spread. Brace for impact. Don't stop until you've got nothing left. The sky burned. Ships reeled, bleeding fire and steel, but even as one fell, another surged forward into the gap it left. Alien allies who had joined the fleet stared in disbelief. They had fought wars before, yes, but wars of borders, of resources, of pride. Never like this. Never a war where every second bought with blood was treated as victory. And the humans, they laughed. Over open comms, voices rang out not with despair, but with jokes, songs, even taunts hurled at the impossible enemy. "Hey, ugly, try chewing on this. Tell my wife I died smiling, and tell her not to remarry someone boring. If you're gonna eat us, at least take us to dinner first." It was madness. It was terrifying. And it was infectious. The alien crews who had joined them found themselves shouting, fighting harder, refusing to break. Because how could they retreat when the humans, broken and bleeding, still charged headlong into the fire? On the carrier Resolute Dawn, a human captain stood over a ruined console, sparks cutting across his face. His ship was dying, every system failing, but the enemy loomed larger still. His first officer begged him to withdraw. "Sir, we can't hold if we stay." The captain's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Then we make our stand here. We hold as long as we can, because every second we hold, someone else gets to live." And with that, he drove his crippled ship forward, ramming into the harvester behemoth, detonating every reactor on board. The explosion lit the void brighter than a sunrise. And for a heartbeat, the impossible enemy recoiled. The fleet roared. But even as the humans fought, the harvesters pressed harder. Their numbers seemed endless, their resilience unnatural. For every abomination destroyed, another slid from the dark. The admirals knew the truth. They could not win. Not here, not against this. But they could buy time. Time for what, for whom, no one knew. But humanity had always fought for tomorrows they themselves would never see. On one frigate, a young ensign huddled in the comms bay, listening to the signal as the battle raged outside. The voice, faint, fragile, trembled into clarity. "Please hold, we are coming, do not fall." Her heart froze. Coming. The voice was not just a warning, it was a promise. Whoever had sent the signal, they were still alive. They were trying to reach the humans. But could they arrive in time? She relayed the words, and across every battered ship, across every bloodied crew, a new fire caught. They were not dying for nothing. They were holding the line for someone who was still fighting to live. The admirals seized it. Their orders spread through the fleet. Every ship, every soul, buy time. Hold the line until the signal's source can rise again. And they obeyed. They fought not for survival, not even for victory, but for the strangers whose voices cried out in the dark. And one by one they fell. The destroyer Iron Tide, torn in half, its crew still firing until atmosphere burned from their lungs. The battleship Endeavor, engines dead, hurling itself like a spear into the largest harvester vessel. The frigate Whispering Gale, shielding an allied convoy, breaking apart piece by piece until nothing remained but silence, and the convoy alive because of them. Each loss should have broken the fleet, but each sacrifice became a beacon, a story, a reason for the next ship to fight harder, longer, louder. And the aliens watching from distant systems began to whisper among themselves. This is why they are. This is why no planet, no storm, no predator could end them. They fight not because they expect to live, but because they refuse to let others die. It was a truth the galaxy had forgotten, and now, watching humanity bleed against the impossible, they remembered. The battle raged into endless hours, fuel drained, ammunition dwindled, hulls cracked. But still the fought. The harvesters pressed closer, their shadows stretched across every burning star. And then the signal pulsed again. Not faint, not broken. Strong, resonant, alive. "We are here." The words rang across every channel, piercing the storm. And from beyond the dark, new shapes emerged. Not harvester, not human, something else. The source of the signal. At last. For hours, the void had been nothing but fire and ruin. Now new stars ignited. At first they looked like reinforcements, more harvester monstrosities, pouring in to crush what remained of the fleet. The crews braced, exhausted, resigned to face them anyway. But then the shapes resolved. Sleek, angular, not alive but forged, not consuming but radiant. Ships, warships, ancient and magnificent, their hulls glimmering with designs no species alive had ever seen. The source of the signal had arrived. Across the battered fleet, whispers surged. "They're real. They survived. They came." The comms flared, static breaking apart into a voice stronger now, no longer fragile but thunderous with resolve. "You heard us, you came, hold fast, for we rise again." The name of the species was lost to time. Some called them the first builders, others the Ashen Kin. Long ago, before most civilizations had even lifted stone tools, they had walked the stars. They had faced the harvesters before. They had nearly been extinguished. Not again. That was their cry, their warning. They had hidden, scattered, diminished into whispers of myth. But now, because humanity had bought the time, they returned. The admirals stood silent as the revelation struck. Humanity had crossed borders, bled against impossible odds, not just to answer a call, but to bring back a people who once thought themselves alone in their survival. And the galaxy watched, stunned, as history unfolded. The new arrivals did not fight like humans. Their weapons were elegant, efficient, precise beams that cut through harvester hulls like fire through silk, shields that shimmered with impossible resilience. Where humans threw themselves like spears, these survivors wielded the calm strength of artisans reforged into warriors. But even with their return, the harvesters did not break. They swarmed, endless and ravenous. For every abomination destroyed, two more slid from the dark. Side by side, humanity and the survivors fought. Fire and fury, hope and defiance. On the bridge of the flagship Vigilant Resolve, a human admiral opened comms to the newly arrived commander. "You sent the signal," he said. "We heard you, but why us? Why call?" The alien's image flickered into being, tall, luminous eyes marked by centuries of loss. "Because you are what we are not. We endured once, but only by hiding, by surviving in silence. But you," the alien's voice trembled, almost reverent. "You cross the stars for strangers, you fight when you cannot win, you carry a fire we lost long ago." For a moment, silence hung. Then the admiral smiled grimly. "Then let's show them what that fire can do." The battle raged anew. The humans fought like wild storms, unpredictable and furious, while the ancient allies cut with precision. Together, they formed a harmony of chaos and control that even the harvesters struggled to counter. Still, the cost was staggering. More human ships fell, their wreckage littering the void like burning constellations. But every time a vessel died, the survivors took its place, weaving through the chaos, shielding, striking, honoring the sacrifice. For the first time the ancient race did not fight alone. And the galaxy, watching from far-flung systems, realized with awe what was unfolding. A new alliance, forged not by treaties or bargains, but by sacrifice and defiance. On the human decks, exhaustion gave way to something deeper. Pride, not for themselves, but for what their blood had purchased. One dying crewman, pinned beneath shattered steel, whispered through a cracked comms unit. Tell them we made it matter." His voice carried, etched into memory, and though he did not live to hear it, the answer came. The alien commander, voice strong and solemn, spoke across every channel. "It mattered more than you can know." The harvesters pressed still, relentless, vast as night itself. But now they faced not silence, not a galaxy cowering behind its borders, but a fleet that had chosen to burn rather than bend. And in that fire, the ancient survivors found their strength again. For centuries they had whispered not again, clinging to fear. Now with humanity at their side, their voices changed. "Not again," they cried, not as plea but as defiance. "Never again." The roared with them, and the stars themselves seemed to tremble at the sound. The war was not won. The harvesters would not fall in a single battle. But something greater had been born. The galaxy had seen a fleet cross impossible borders. They had seen humans bleed for strangers, laugh in the face of death, and rise again after every fall. And now, an ancient people once broken by fear rose beside them. Together they held the line. And in that moment, the impossible seemed just a little less certain. The war did not end in a single battle. It stretched into days, then weeks. The harvesters did not retreat. They did not falter. They consumed endlessly, hungrily, as if every world, every star was nothing but fuel for their hunger. And so, they and their newfound allies fought a war of attrition across the void. Battlefields littered with burning wreckage. Graveyards of ships that once carried laughter, now reduced to drifting ash. The ancient survivors fought with precision. They struck like artists, elegant beams slicing through harvester hulls. Every move was calculated, every risk weighed. The humans fought like storms, unpredictable, reckless. They rammed crippled frigates into leviathans. They overloaded reactors and turned their deaths into weapons. They boarded harvester monstrosities with nothing but rifles, knives, and the sheer audacity to try. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to shift. Not victory, not yet. But for the first time, the harvesters bled. Reports spread across the fleet, whispers of hope, tales of humans fighting with broken bodies, of captains who laughed as their ships died, of crews who chose fire over surrender. To the survivors, these stories were incomprehensible. Their doctrine had always been survival, hiding, enduring, outlasting. Yet humanity showed them another way to matter, even in death. It terrified them, and it inspired them. On the vigilant resolve, the admiral stood over the hollow table, the war map burning red with enemy presence. His officers argued the line could not hold forever. The harvesters were too many, too vast. The admiral's voice cut through. Then we don't hold, we break them. Stunned silence followed. Sir, with respect, one captain said, that's impossible. The admiral's lips curled into a thin, almost weary smile. They told us that before, and we agreed, then we did it anyway. It was not strategy, it was not logic, it was human. The plan spread across the fleet, a gambit, reckless and final. A strike deep into the heart of the harvester swarm. Not to destroy them outright, but to wound them so grievously that the galaxy would have time to prepare, to rally, to rise. Every officer knew what it meant. Every crew understood. Most would not return. And still, not a single ship turned back. Because that was the truth at humanity's core. They were not fighting for themselves. They were fighting for tomorrow. For voices they had never heard, for children not yet born, for strangers they would never meet. The ancient survivors, watching this madness unfold, struggled to understand. One of their commanders whispered to his human counterpart, "You would burn everything, even yourselves, for others. Why?" The human smiled, tired but fierce. "Because if we don't, then no one will." It was not an answer the survivors could comprehend, but they felt its weight, and for the first time in centuries, they began to fight not just to survive, but to defy. The fleet prepared. Engines screamed under strain. Ammunition was rationed to the last shell. Crews wrote messages home, knowing they might never send them. And yet laughter still echoed in the decks. Songs still rose over comms. Humans joked about their own deaths, about odds so ridiculous they made the universe itself laugh. One alien ally confessed, bewildered, "I do not understand you. How can you sing knowing what awaits?" A human pilot, grinning as she strapped into her fighter, answered simply, "Because if death is coming, I'd rather it find me smiling." It was madness, and it was unstoppable. The fleet surged forward, driving into the heart of the swarm. The harvesters stirred, their vast forms shifting like tides of shadow. The admirals gave the order. "All ships, this is it. We strike now, we hold nothing back." The fleet roared into the abyss. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Harvester leviathans collided with human dreadnoughts, their screams echoing through the void. Fighters swarmed like hornets, darting into impossible gaps, detonating themselves in blinding fire. The survivors fought alongside them, their precision sharpened by human recklessness, their elegance reforged by human fire. Together they carved into the swarm. But the cost was staggering. Ship after ship fell, names etched into memory even as their wreckage burned. And still the humans fought. Because the plan was not to survive. The plan was to strike deep enough, hard enough, that the harvesters would remember pain, that the galaxy would have time to rise before the swarm consumed everything. The admirals knew it, the captains knew it, the crews knew it. And still not one faltered. Because that was humanity's truth. They had never been the strongest, never the oldest, never the most advanced. But they had always been the ones who refused to stop. Even when the galaxy whispered impossible. Even when death was certain. Even when the night itself tried to swallow them. They kept going. And as the swarm closed in, As the stars burned with ruin, the admirals gave their final order. Hold the line, make it matter. The humans answered with fire. The last battle was not fought in silence. It was fought in thunder. Engines screaming, cannons roaring, hulls tearing open with the fury of dying stars. The fleet plunged into the heart of the swarm, and the swarm closed around them like a great, endless tide. Every ship knew its fate, every crew knew the cost. And still they charged. Aboard the Vigilant Resolve, the admiral stood unmoving as alarms shrieked. His bridge was fire and smoke, his crew wounded, dying, refusing to stop. Status, he demanded. Shields gone, weapons burning out, reactor unstable. He nodded. Then we aim the whole damn ship. The helmsman turned, blood running down his face. Sir. The admiral cut him off with a smile, weary but fierce. They told us it was impossible, remember. The helmsman grinned through the pain. Yes, sir, then we agreed and did it anyway. The ship hurled itself forward, a spear of steel and fury detonating in the swarm's heart. The explosion rippled through the void, tearing leviathans apart. And it was not the only one. Across the fleet, ships sacrificed themselves in blinding fire. Frigates colliding with titans, destroyers overloading cores, fighters diving straight into gaping maws, laughing as they went. Each death was a spark. Each spark lit another, until the swarm, endless and vast, finally began to burn. The ancient survivors fought at their side, their elegant maneuvers sharpened by grief and awe. For centuries they had whispered not again in fear. Now they roared it as defiance. Not again, never again. And the humans roared with them, even as they fell. The swarm writhed, wounded for the first time in. Their endless hunger faltered. They pulled back, not defeated, but it was enough. The galaxy had time now. Time bought with fire and blood. Time carved out of the impossible by a species that refused to stop. On the broken decks of surviving ships, silence fell. Humans slumped in their chairs, bleeding, laughing, crying. They had lived when they should have died. And among them, the survivors, once fractured, once hiding, knelt in silence, eyes wide. They had seen something they could never unsee. One whispered, almost reverent, "You are, and yet you bring life. Hope how?" A human medic, hands shaking as he bound his own wounds, gave the only answer that mattered. Because if we don't, who will? The word spread, carried across comms, etched into memory. Because that was humanity, not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced. But the ones who stood when standing was madness. The ones who burned when burning meant hope for others. The ones who smiled, even at the end. The galaxy would not forget. The survivors swore oaths that day, to rise again, to never cower in silence, to carry forward the fire humans had shown them. And though many human ships were lost, though countless lives had ended in flame, something greater endured. A legend, not of conquest, not of power, but of defiance. Generations later, when children asked how the harvesters had been stopped, the answer would never be about weapons or strategy. It would always begin with a question. They told the humans it was impossible. Do you know what they said back? And the answer, spoken with a smile, always the same. They agreed and then did it anyway. Across alien borders, the signal had echoed. And the had answered. Not with silence, not with surrender, but with fire. And in that fire, the galaxy found its hope.